Hello, everyone. Our today's guest is Michael Strong. You can find his socials on the episode description. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. I was looking forward to explore the Socratic experience and the future of the education system. My first question to you, I'm curious to know what was your motivation back then to start the Socratic experience, and I'm assuming that is related with your experience with the traditional education system.
Yeah, so I went to regular public schools. This is going way back. I went to regular public schools in the United States, allegedly good public schools, but I found myself very bored. I got straight A's, but was did not like school. Then I had a
Mm,
class where a teacher basically taught Socratically when I was in high school. We would read Plato and Nietzsche and Buber, and we would discuss them, and I absolutely loved it. And so
mm,
that led me to eventually go to a college, St. John's College in Santa Fe, where all classes were taught Socratically. And I loved it so
right.
much that I started working in first public school classrooms, leading Socratic discussions. And then I eventually started creating my own private schools based on Socratic discussions. So I've been doing this now for 35 years. I think
Mm.
thinking and discussing ideas with people is one of the most enjoyable things you can do. Many students really enjoy it. And so I've basically created a way where I can continue to do what I love and love what I do. And most of the time, most students also love what we do together.
Yeah, that's right. And you think the system has been evolving uh, positively since your experience with the education system?
Yeah, so a couple of things. On the one hand, sadly, in the United States, there has been pressure towards high stakes testing, which has made it less possible to do this in the public schools. There's still some people that do, but there's so much top-down control and pressure to prepare for tests that there's actually less freedom to do this in public schools than there used to be. That
Mm,
said, in my private system, we've got now decades of experience. And so, for instance, one of the things that we focus on is really working to develop a good group dynamic. A lot of adults who enjoy discussing ideas like the idea of, you know, young people talking about ideas, but it doesn't work, say, if some young people are dominating the conversation. It doesn't work with adults either if some are
mm,
dominating, or if there are insults going on, or passivity, or if they don't take ideas seriously. So there are all kinds of failure modes, and over the years, we've developed a lot of tools for addressing the various failure modes to increase the probability that we will have great conversations on a more consistent basis in our classrooms.
yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, you often speak of human flourishing as a deeper goal than academic success. But in a system built around grades and metrics, how do you measure something as inherently unquantifiable as a flourishing soul?
Really, really good question. And again, to be very plain, my goal as an educator and our explicit goal of the for our entire staff is lifelong flourishing or lifelong happiness and well-being of our children. And
Mm,
again, is there a measure? There's no obvious measure. On the other hand, one way we think about it is as a way to determine what is in the child's best interest. Certainly, part of that is that the child should be able to have a career that they love, and they should be prepared for a career that they love. For students going to college, that means preparation for college. But say for a student who wants to be an entrepreneur or a creator, maybe it means a greater focus on their entrepreneurial skills or their creative talents than on traditional college prep. And so we customize our program based on the probable life path of a particular child. It also implies that, for instance, we do not want to stress the child unduly, and we also want the child to find their education to be meaningful. I think many people in both in traditional education and many traditional jobs do not find their lives meaningful. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the true, the good, and the beautiful in various ways because we
Mm,
want students to find a life path that is aligned with their own convictions. I teach a purpose class 5 days a week where we discuss what do you love, what are you good at, what does the world need, and what will the world pay for. And so they can gradually think about their commitments in each of those categories and develop a life path. Not that they have a whole game plan, but they can kind of point themselves in a direction that's aligned with creating a life that they love, where they're good at it, where they make money, and where they're doing something meaningful.
yeah, that sounds absolutely great. So, yeah, from Socratic experiences fully online, correct?
Yes, I did my whole life. I did brick and mortar schools. I started my first virtual school uh, during COVID. Everyone was talking about how bad online education was, but it turns out that Socratic dialogue works pretty well online. And on the one hand, of course, we miss being in person. I think I love being in person with people. On the other hand, the advantage is incredible flexibility. We have students from around the world, probably
Mm,
20 different countries, and
wow.
families can travel. We have families that say summer in Canada and winter in Panama. We have athletes who can go to various events and move around while they're competing. So the virtual aspect gives us incredible flexibility. We've got some students in rural areas where there are no interesting schools there, and so they're able to have a much richer intellectual life than they would have had just in person. So while we do miss the in-person, the virtual does give us advantages that are also pretty wonderful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, and considering the rapid advancements in technology and the growing emphasis on personalized learning, how do you foresee the role of educators evolving in the next decade, and what skills will be essential for teachers to effectively facilitate student-centered learning in both virtual and traditional classrooms?
No, great question. For a long time, I've said that humans should do what humans do best, and tech should be what tech does best. And
Mm,
tech is getting better at things. So, for instance, we use math apps for self-paced math. So one student can be covering 2 years of math per year. Another student can, even be cleaning up things they hadn't learned before. Math is highly personalized thanks to the math apps. And the math apps, there's a lot of hype around AI, but AI is helping the math apps get better. But the human beings play several roles. First, a huge amount of kind of motivation and meaning around it. Why are we studying math? What does it mean to study math? How do we learn math? How do you understand math? As well as particular, human beings are still helpful with particular concepts. So, the apps can give students the procedural knowledge to solve a math problem, but they don't have the bigger picture about how is this math used in the real world? Why would somebody want to learn this? Where did this come from? And so I see the repetition of rote procedures and the gradual building up in mathematics from simple procedures to more complex procedures as something the math apps do pretty well. But the
mm,
human being is there to coach both cognitively and emotionally to help coach the student as learner more broadly. And occasionally that can include a little explanation of the math. But I would say as the math app explanations get better, it's more about providing meaning and context around the math along with motivation.
yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think we often confuse teaching with learning. In your ideal future where learning is fully self-directed and curiosity-driven, what is the actual role of um, I don't I don't really like to use this role, but adults and yeah, are they like kind of facilitators or co-learners?
Yeah, so first, I'm a very big on autodidacticism. One of the reasons I love learning, but I hate school, is I don't want anybody to teach me anything. I can
Mm,
learn anything quickly on my own. I read about 10 times as fast as I can listen. For me, it's sort of it's a total waste of time for somebody to stand up and teach at me. And I can just read a book or look at something online and boom, get it
yeah.
very quickly. But I think that humans are fundamentally social creatures. I think we always have been and always will be. And so I think just one of the reasons I find discussing ideas so powerful is we want to test our meaning systems. We want to explore our meaning systems. I see Socratic dialogue as fundamentally a matter where we all expect each other to have consistent and coherent understandings of reality. And on big questions such as what is truth, what is justice, what does it mean to be honorable, what does it mean to be betrayed, there is never one final, this is the, definitive answer. I think in every context, we want to understand for ourselves, do I believe that this was just? Do I believe that this was honorable? Do I believe that that person betrayed me? And I think the wisdom consists of understanding the edge cases. Back in the days, there was such a thing as wisdom. Sadly, modernity has mostly forgotten the notion of wisdom. But I think a lot of people who don't spend time really thinking about these challenging cases of how to apply our principles, they can be brittle. They can be moralistic and brittle, or they can be strictly amoral and hedonistic or materialistic. Whereas I think part of moral maturity is learning through interactions with other people how to evaluate things fairly and reasonably. And in a world where our moral stances will be ever more complex, there will be ever more issues coming up. I think there's a lot of benefit to living in a community with other moral reasoners where you can evaluate things together and come to the best solution in each particular case. And so I see, for the didactic portion of teaching, which is what most people see school as being, yeah, the apps and multimedia will do much of that, maybe most of that. But even there, for instance, in history, yes, you can have something deliver the facts of history, but what should we think about, the French Revolution? What should we think about the American War of Independence? What should we think about the New Deal? All of these things in the United States, all these things, there are important questions of moral and political philosophy. And I think different people, land on different positions. And part of this is I believe that it is part of the human condition that we will have different opinions. But I think there's such a thing as having more thoughtful versions of different opinions as opposed to brittle and dogmatic positions on various issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the behaviors that I was punished in school, after in life I am rewarded by them, and the a lot of the behaviors that I was punished in life I was rewarded in school. So it's a little of backyards. And yeah, even Illich has this amazing book, Schooling Society. Yeah, maybe tell me what you thought about it.
So I'm a big fan of Ivan Illich, and I think one of the key insights of Illich is that this entire system of schooling, which almost everyone takes for granted, is
Mm.
unnecessary and artificial. And going back to autodidacticism, it has always been the case that any of us can learn anything on our own. Yes, human beings are helpful. Yes, back when books were rare, when I needed access to books. But Frederick Douglass in the United States was born a slave. It was illegal for anyone to teach him to read, and he became very
Mm.
erudite completely through autodidacticism. And so once access to books is no longer, a constraint, and now with the internet, anyone with a smartphone has more access to more knowledge than, anyone in world history. It's just, astonishing what we have access to. And yet most people still have this bizarre belief they need to go to school, their children need to go to school, they need to go to college, they need to take a course. Illich is pointing out that those systems were not necessary, and above all, they give people a sense of dependence. They put people in a state of waiting on others for validation, authority, authorization. And I think that it's destructive to agency. I'm very big on the notion of human agency. And I think most happy, flourishing people feel a strong sense of agency. And so part of my mission to develop young people into autodidacts is not just learning, but also taking action. I want them to feel free and empowered. It doesn't mean you'll succeed. A lot of entrepreneurs try things and fail, and a lot of famous people have failed over and over again. Um, Winston Churchill said that success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And I really like
Yeah.
that because, I think that our most empowered young people are those who will both go out and discover and then do and keep doing and keep exploring. And it's, I would say, a very vivid life. And the entire
Mm.
schooling system really trains people to wait and do as they're told. I'm a big fan of John Taylor Gatto, Gatto. He was New York State Teacher of the Year, and he describes schooling as 13 years of training in how to be passive and how to be dependent. You're basically
Ooh.
told every day to wait and do as you're told, and not to believe something unless the teacher has validated it as the right answer. And when you think about what's needed in life, I was going to say in the 21st century, but in life in general, uh, telling people that they need to be wait and do as they're told is one of the most destructive things that you could possibly do to them.
Yeah. Yeah. You were saying that education make some dependent, and yeah, I see, like, I think that's the entire point of the education system, because they don't want us to make genius. So do you think we'll ever kind of let go of that dependence and truly embrace a more Socratic and free schooling?
So, I've been at this for a long time. It's literally 35 years. And I
Mm.
would say the last few years, there's much more openness, at least in the United States. And I would attribute it to a couple of things. First, COVID, had so many parents here seeing what's actually going on in their child's classroom. And they see how banal and boring it is. And so I think that the rhetoric that people like you and I have used forever um, only had a limited effect. But when they see that basically their child is not learning much on these classes, that opened many up to alternatives. So in the US, there's
Mm.
been an explosion in homeschooling, in microschooling, small personalized schools, learning pods, hybrid schools, virtual, just a huge explosion in alternative kinds of education since COVID. Um, the other thing is, I think the rise of tech apps helps. So something going back to the math, I think the fact that parents who may not have felt confident in learning math now have all these tools. You could always get math workbooks and whatnot, but now there are better and better tools for learning the basics and personalizing the basics for your child. And then finally, there is uh, I would say the tech entrepreneurs, most of our parents at the Socratic experience are either tech entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs more broadly or creative professionals, people who create value in their own lives. And there are an increasing number of high profile tech entrepreneurs who have given up on the system. I live in Austin. I've supposed most of my career as an educator has been in San Francisco and Austin, two tech hubs, with Austin growing as a tech hub in the last few years. Um, Most of the entrepreneurs I know in Austin are at least open to alternative schools, and these are, billionaires, centimillionaires, very elite people. 50 years ago, they would all have sent their kids to the elite private schools, but now they don't want the elite private schools. Now they realize a personalized homeschooling or microschooling experience is going to be better for their child. Joe Lamont is a billionaire here in Austin who has a school called Alpha School that is very focused on agency and personalization. Naval Ravikant is a famous, I think he's a centimillionaire, very
Yeah.
famous tech entrepreneur in the U.S., and he's totally all in on child agency. Uh, he's a big fan of the sovereign child, getting children and his own children in a homeschool program, doing their own thing. And I could go on and on. So once the elites have dumped the system, then it's promising. Finally, one more thing in the US, we have educational scholarship accounts where parents can now use in about 15 states government funds to send their child to a private school or or finance homeschooling. And so there are an estimated 25 million students when Texas goes who will have access to, somewhere between say $8,000 to $10,000 a year to send their children to a private school or to homeschool their child. So I see us at a huge, in the technological adoption cycle, we're already at the stage of early adopters have adopted, as it were, the technology of high agency personalized schooling. And the next challenge will be to cross the chasm in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mhm. Great. And how much time do you think will take until we kind of reach the perfect, not perfect, but more like education system that you want?
Well, I think it's all a matter of degree, and I think some people will remain attached to the old system for a long time. But I think it's plausible that in 20 years in the United States, it
Mm,
could be that the high agency learning could have 20 to 30% market share, and and that's just again with everything. It takes a long time. I think education is especially slow, but I think if we get to 20 to 30% market share in 20 years, then in 40 years we may be to 50% market share, and then after that the old system could collapse over the next few decades.
mm, yeah. Yeah, credentialism continues to dominate education and employment alike. If we truly eliminate the need for credentials, what kind of decentralized trust systems would have to emerge to fill the gap?
Good question. So first, on the bright side, there are some domains where credentialism is very weak today. So
Mm,
certainly, tech in particular, coding, software development, way back, I know people as early as the 1970s and 80s who got into tech without college degrees. And of course,
mm,
Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, those kind of famous tech entrepreneurs were college dropouts. And so the entire tech sector in the United States has been friendly towards non-traditional pathways, non-college pathways for many decades. And it really is about performance. Separately, a lot of people don't think about sales. I think the whole world of college educated people tend not to be sales friendly, but sales has always been about performance. You know, much of sales is commission based. If you can sell the thing and nobody cares what your credentials were, you are selling, and that's what
yeah.
matters. Similarly, marketing, and now because so much is digital marketing is credential free. If every website wants more eyeballs, every business wants more sales, and I'm seeing a boom in digital marketing done by often self-taught amateurs. And even at our school, I've got an 18-year-old digital marketer who's going to make about $200,000
Ooh.
because he's self-taught and he knows how to make things pop. You think about it, you know, who knows better the algorithms of Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and all of this? Teenagers tend to know this stuff way better. A college professor of marketing who's, teaching out of a marketing textbook that's 10 years old and he did his research 40 years old, clueless, absolutely clueless. Whereas young people live and breathe social media, so they know what pops, how it pops, how to create creative. So I would say the worlds of tech, sales, and marketing are already, I would say, very merit-based. Also, creative professionals, people who do branding, advertising, that kind of thing. Again, it's all about, does it sell the product successfully? Does it catch attention? Um, on the other end, of course, things like, medicine are perhaps the most credentialed. And, obviously people don't want an uncredentialed doctor. I think there may be alternative credentialing systems even in medicine that grow up very slowly. I'm involved in a project to create new jurisdictions around the world, which are
Mm,
open to new credentialing systems, even for medicine. but I think those will be much, much slower. So it really depends on the domain you're looking at, but there are substantial domains growing. In the US, there's been a movement even by major corporations no longer to require college degrees. I think 10 years ago, Google required college degrees. Now, Google, Apple, Whole Foods, etc., no longer require college degrees.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. As the lead author of Be the Solution, How Entrepreneurs and Conscious Capitalists Can Solve All the World's Problems, you advocate for integrating entrepreneurial principles into education. How do you envision this integration fostering a generation of students equipped of tackled global challenges with innovative and ethical solutions?
No, great question. So, to start with, on the entrepreneurship side, we have several ways in which we cultivate entrepreneurship among our students. First, we advertise ourselves as catering to entrepreneurial, creative, and intellectual students. So we're attracting many entrepreneurial students to start with. For
Mm,
many teenagers who are entrepreneurial, there really are not many good options. If you want to do things, regular school is a terrible option. And so we start with some entrepreneurial students. Then we've got electives on entrepreneurship, how to start a business, digital marketing, coding, finance, various things either adjacent to entrepreneurship or right on entrepreneurship. We also have STEM courses that are focused on developing
mm,
entrepreneurship. So, for instance, innovation and entrepreneurship. There are all kinds of, AI is obviously something where people are focused on AI and entrepreneurship, but consider material science. There are new cool materials being developed almost daily. And if I was a teenager, I would be interested in these new materials and what can I make that was not possible to make 5 years ago, 10 years ago out of the cool new material. And so in
mm,
various ways, we have students focused on, innovation and entrepreneurship so they can be at the cutting edge of various trends. Then on the meaning side, our Socratic humanities courses are constantly discussing the true, the good, and the beautiful, the ethical in various different ways. My purpose course
nice.
again, what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? What will the world pay for? We're so we're combining this, ecosystem which attracts and develops entrepreneurs with ecosystem that's all about meaning and purpose. And so they can each come to their own direction with respect to how can they how can they initiate or join a startup project, and then how can they either develop it into something that's meaningful or work towards a more meaningful direction within their work that they're already doing.
Mm. Yeah, and in what ways can educational institutions cultivate a culture that not only emphasizes academic achievements, but also instills a commitment to social responsibility and conscious entrepreneurship among students?
So I actually think the fact of daily discussion on morally relevant topics highlights it.
Mm,
One of the strange things is in a traditional school, even if you have, say, a teacher who lectures on ethics, the typical pattern is, first of all, in the United States, 75% of students are unhappy at school, two-thirds are not interested in learning. And so basically, whatever you're teaching, most students are not getting it anyway. But a teacher who's teaching a lecture on ethics, the kids may take the notes, they may memorize something for the test. They'll either get a good grade on the test or the bad grade on the test, but I think there's very little evidence any of it sticks. Most of us do not remember most of what we were taught in school. I describe most of school as memorize and forget. Again, I was a straight A student who was really good at the memorize and forget thing.
mm,
Contrast that with daily discussions of what should we do and why. And I'll give you an example. When we read Plato's Gorgias, classic texts, one of the things that Socrates argues is that we should bring our friends to justice. And that sounds a little bit abstract, but we make it very concrete. Suppose you had a friend who had been driving drunk. Would you would you hold them accountable and would you report them to somebody? Because if Socrates is correct in the Gorgias that we should bring our friends to justice, um, we have an obligation to interact with our friends. And so whether or not kids are excited about reading Plato, the issue about would they confront their friend if their friend had done something wrong, that's a very live personal issue. And we can get very lively conversations going on. And we don't tell the students what they should do, but in any group of, say, 15, um, there will be some students who are very moral about it and say, absolutely, you should confront your friend if they're driving drunk. And others who kind of want to get away with it or let them go, and no, I don't. But when you have some of your peers, first of all, anything peers say to each other is probably 10 times as powerful, especially in moral issues, as an adult preaching. And so when you have this conversation where there's a lot of energy in a peer group about moral questions, I think is one of the most powerful ways to make moral and ethical issues alive. And again, there will be some students who take, I would say, amoral positions in class and go on to be amoral in reality. I'm not claiming we can train everybody to be an ethical actor, but by means of almost daily conversations on morally charged issues, it brings real moral issues to the forefront of everybody's mind. And so those who are inclined to think and behave morally are embedded in it, immersed in it. And I think for most of our students, some kind of moral behavior, belief, orientation becomes second nature to them after doing this for years.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Yeah. In your work, gamification of learning is mentioned as a tool. Um, what's your take on the psychological mechanisms at play when learning is designed to be as addictive as gaming? And is there an ethical line educators shouldn't cross?
Oh, good question. I mean, first, of course, I vastly prefer internal motivation to external motivation, and gaming implies external motivation. Uh, that said, it is part of the world, and I think the way I see it is gamification is fine for very limited sorts of tasks, because most students are, certainly by adolescents, are immersed in gaming. Certainly most boys are immersed in gaming. On the one
Yeah.
hand, doing a little bit of activity that is gamified just uh, allows them to take the world they love and do something useful with it. But if we do too much, then we won't develop these broader moral commitments and intrinsic motivation. So I see gamification as a relatively side strand. There are little places where it can be useful, especially when students might not be motivated. Um, we're using Math Academy, which is math software. I would not describe it as gamified, but they do provide points for going through the curriculum, in a faster, more effective way. And so that's a little bit of, oh, I got so many XR points kind of thing. We also are testing out a thing for social cooperation where the students play a game together, and in order to get through the game successfully, they need to talk to each other to coordinate. And
Ooh.
so there we use their gamification motivation to get them to be more effective at cooperating. So, there are little places like that. That said, I would say the heart and soul of what we do are these, I would say, very slow, thoughtful Socratic discussions, which are very much the opposite of gamification. Gamification is dopamine hits fast, usually, whereas we want them to be very thoughtful and slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I wanted to focus on scaling alternative models and cultural evolution. You've created schools that outperform elite systems in shockingly short time frames. But how do we scale these success stories in a culture still addicted to standardization? And how do you prevent your models from being co-opted and diluted during growth?
No, great questions. So, first, the founder of Logo, Seymour Papert, was a professor at MIT who created the Logo programming language. He was also
Mm.
an early, yeah. early AI guy, and his logo programming language got into Legos. So there were the early robots created by Legos as toys for kids were the legacy of Seymour Papert. So he had a whole vision that he was going to transform education by, having kids program these super cool robots, and it did become a successful consumer product through Legos. But
Yeah.
he said after decades of trying this, and he was, very high profile, very influential, had funding for what he did. He said the problem with schooling is reformers want to change the school, but school changes the reform. And he brought up some work by some Stanford scholars where they talked about the grammar of schooling. That is, standard schooling has to fit everything into the boxes of this is third grade math, this is seventh grade history, this is the quarterly report, this is how we evaluate. There are the system of schooling has pretty severe constraints, and so while one can put interesting things in it, and heroic teachers maintain the integrity of the interesting things, if it's part of that standard system, eventually it will be co-opted. Um, on the other hand, this is where I describe these high agency schools, home schools, micro schools. I'm excited about these new programs that are now growing, I would say rapidly in the US, that are outside the system. And if your child is racing ahead in math, they could do 3 years of math. If they don't want to do history for the next 5 years, they don't have to do history for the next 5 years. That is, in order for these new options to develop, they fundamentally do need to be outside the system. And even to the point of, we need more options outside of high school and college degrees. So the good
Mhm.
news is that this world is growing now at a pretty good rate in the United States. And, I mentioned earlier the educational scholarship accounts where um, government funds can be used to pay for these. For me, it's a critical battle that these funds not be forced to go into standard legacy systems. Right now, in many states, we have students in Arizona who get $8,000 from the state of Arizona for our program, but some states are forcing these funds only to go to standard accredited schools that are following the standard curriculum. And if that happens, then we're forced back into the old boxes. So I often argue with people, say on Twitter, about how important it is to let different students learn in different ways. And I think in some ways standard educators we have to fight. And then of course many education professors are very, very conservative with respect to they got to do the standard thing. So, ultimately it's a matter of having this cultural movement. The good news is, again, we've got, wealthy tech entrepreneurs who are school's bullshit. I'm not going to have my kid do that kind of stuff. And so winning this cultural battle, and we need both to have the supply of lots of fabulous, cool options, and then the demand from more diverse families about this is the way we need to go. Finally,
Mhm.
one other point, often I talk about the adolescent mental health crisis because in my experience, and I've been again doing this 35 years, I've had hundreds of kids who are anxious, depressed, suicidal. They left a standard school, came to one of my schools, and within weeks or months, they became happy and well, uh, didn't need the meds, didn't need to go to therapy anymore. And as a consequence, I've seen that the standard system causes mental health problems. And of course, Jonathan Haidt and Jane Twenge are justifiably famous for pointing out the ways that smartphones and social media are damaging adolescent mental health. And I would say yes, but that's because school is so meaningless and brutal. And that if we take kids out of traditional schooling where they're no longer bored and humiliated 6 to 8 hours a day, and give them high agency and a lot of meaning and purpose, then that's the ultimate solution to the adolescent mental health crisis. And I've got a small but growing following of parents and educators who are with me on this. Peter Gray he's famous for his work on unschooling and self-directed learning. Peter Gray is right there with me on this, as are a number
Mhm.
of other people. So I see our job, and the reason I mention this is it's one thing to believe that more self-directed learning, high agency autodidacticism is better. It's a very different thing to say your child is less likely to die of suicide if you put them in one of these programs.
Mm.
And I don't want to be kind of a fear monger, but for me, it's so true. If your child, the light is going out of their eyes, and it doesn't have to be about suicide. I've known, again, hundreds of kids where they were bright, curious, motivated, joyful children, and they get into teenage years, and maybe they're just, addicted to gaming and don't care about anything else. Sometimes they become potheads. Sometimes, they are just don't care about anything in life. Sometimes they get clinical anxiety and can't do anything. There are a lot of different failure modes, but I think that almost everybody underestimates the extent to which standard schooling is actively damaging to children.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I do think that education shapes the soul of a nation. Yeah, cultural operating systems take centuries to evolve, but education might be the key to rebuilding ours. Do you see alternative schooling as a tool to be seed entirely new civilizational values? And yeah, if so, what kinds of future are you personally trying to midlife?
Great question. Well, first, I hired my Portuguese guide, João Paios, because he wrote a Substack on high schoolers are the key to a new golden age. And I love that big picture optimism, which is very similar to me. No, if you think about it, first I'll start the negative and then I'll do the positive. If you think about it, if most students, again, not all, I said 75% of students are unhappy in high school. Hey, 25% like it. So I would say our society is largely built by the 25% of the people who liked high school and go on to create systems that are aligned with the kind of behavior that worked for them in high school. But meanwhile, 75% are unhappy and they go on to be, bored, addicted, live meaningless lives, depressed, anxious, all of these things. And I think of the amount of moral, intellectual, and spiritual energy that's being lost, and the signal that we should just do as we're told and jump through the hoops that is not working for 75% of the population. And so what if those 75%, instead of being, basically taught to be mostly miserable and inert, and again, they live lives, they have families, it's not completely a loss, but when I think of a new world, I think of what if we had 75% who are who cared most about meaning, who benefited most from living high agency lives from a young age, who began
Yeah,
building meaningful high agency lives from 10, 11, 13, whatever, and what they could do individually and collectively, especially if they're focused on creating meaningful entrepreneurial initiatives, I think it's absolutely mind-boggling. Again, one of the kind of examples I like to point out is in the world of tech. In 1970, IBM was the third largest corporation in the world, and
mm,
John Kenneth Galbraith, a famous intellectual at the time, said that the world of entrepreneurship was over. Basically, everybody believed that it was either Marxism in the East Bloc or corporatism, basically in the West. And meanwhile, in the 1970s, a bunch of teenage boys changed the world. Steve
yeah,
Jobs, Bill Gates, founder of Lotus, Mitch Kapoor, um, you know, Wozniak, all these kids basically, they started tinkering, and holy crap, their tinkering led to companies that now dominate the world, and they gradually made the old big tech dinosaurs obsolete. Nobody IBM
yeah.
still exists, but nobody thinks about it, talks about it anymore. And so that was because in tech, you didn't need credentials. Any kid playing around could create the thing. And so if we can replicate that, not just in tech, but again, I'm all out there in terms of health. Suppose we could let young people focus on new ways to be healthy, new ways to learn, new ways to create community, yada, yada, yada. And this is where I get into, yeah, community formation and so forth. I see the most valuable industries in the 21st century to be the creation of new forms of law and governance, new forms of community and culture. And I think that if young people are empowered and allowed to do these things, then we can have a world in which competing entrepreneurs are competing to produce better lifestyles for happiness and well-being that are based in healthy communities, healthy child rearing, healthy families, in lots of different ways. There's no one right way. So just as we've got lots of different tech, we've got lots of different restaurants. I want a lot of different people trying a lot of different things and seeing what works.
Yeah, yeah, the future is bright. Yeah, most people see education as a preparation of life, but you seem to describe as the very fabric of life itself. What would a world look like where the line between education and life and living had completely disappeared?
No, good question. Well, my wife and I, she's building these prosperous cities in Africa, and
Mm.
also has her skincare products. She and I work all the time in one sense. On the other hand, we both do what we love and love what we do. And
Mm.
so, and we don't have bosses. And so, we can take off on a Tuesday and go on a hike or go on a walk or go out to eat somewhere or, a Wednesday or whatever, or we can work late into the night on Saturday. That is,
Yes.
our behavior is not driven by other people and other systems. And I just mentioned this because, of course, that's my first point of contact. But I live in a world where I would say most of the people I know are entrepreneurs or self-employed professionals who are completely in charge of their own lives. And they may want or need more money sometimes, in which case they may, work more hours or, get to a point where they're selling more things or billing at a higher rate. Or they may want to take a year off and travel or 2 years off and travel. Or, I know of a couple from Capo Verde who spend part of the year in Holland, part of the year in Capo Verde, and now they're in Thailand for 2 months because they want to be in Thailand for 2 months. We live in an extraordinary age where there are all these digital nomads and so forth. And I think especially for young people, what a time when you can, if you can earn really a modest amount of money online, you can live anywhere and do anything. So I think I see more people creating lives for themselves where they are in charge of when and how they work. And of course, yeah, it doesn't mean they have money coming in all the time. The other aspect of, I think, learning to lead a life that you love is, personally, I can get along with very little money. There have been times in my life when I lived on almost no money. And
Mm.
various ways to do that. You can live in the country in a small place and, rice and beans. There are ways to live on very little money. And I think I think the people who suffer are people who think they need to buy the fancy clothes and the fancy car and they need to have all the newest fancy things and they need to show up to the fancy nightclubs. I think that's a recipe for misery. And, I know people in investment banking in New York who, earn 500,000 a year and are broke all the time because they're spending all their money on all the things. And I think the more people feel empowered to truly live the life they love. And yeah, if they want to make money, they go and do the thing to make the money. If they want to live cheaply and travel the world or raise a family in the middle of the country and have goats and chickens. See, I think it's a matter of having this huge range of lifestyles, and you're, as a child, a teen, and adult, you're fully agentic. I'm very interested in how to become a high agency human being. George Mack is a guy on Twitter who has really great stuff on
Yeah.
being high agency. And yeah, I think once we are in charge of who we are and the decisions we make, and are no longer dependent on the opinion of others or, things we perceive as needs, which are not really needs, the world all of a sudden becomes such a land of opportunity for most of us, not for everybody for sure. There are people stuck in, bad countries with bad governments, and there are horrible things that happen, even in developed countries and so forth. But, um, you know, I know people, even in some of these very difficult countries, who are remarkably high agency, and they learn stuff online and they create a beautiful world virtually where they earn money, they have friends, they're engaged in a vibrant intellectual and creative life, they're learning the entrepreneurial things. I think that we're much closer to a better world than we realize. And sometimes I think people think I'm just Pollyannish. And of course, bad
Hmm.
things are out there. I would say despair is always an option. I could look at this or that bad thing that happened today and yep, I give up. But if you look at the other side of this, that there are people creating this world where we're not harming people, we're doing good. My dream is for all 9 billion people basically to wake up and work all day, loving what they do, making other human lives better. And again, it may sound ridiculous, but that's kind of what most of the people in my network do. We enjoy waking up and, providing goods and services for other people that make their lives better while also enjoying doing so. What's not to like? And, again, a much longer story of how to get from here to there at scale. But part of it is acknowledging that this is a legitimate, valid vision that is already a reality for, my guess is, tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of people already. And we're just so caught up in the hatred and anger and zero-sum fights that we're forgetting it. And so,
Yeah.
I'm out here to be a kind of a beacon of optimism and let's do the thing and let's quit hating and fighting and just create value for each other and create organizations where we can be effective and enjoy doing it.
What a great takeaway, Mike. Yeah, my last question to you is, what's the most important thing you've learned?
Oh, really good question. I would say, despite all of my optimism, all of this is hard. Somebody once described entrepreneurship as the best personal growth you can ever get
Ah,
because, reality hits every day. Elon Musk describes entrepreneurship as chewing glass while staring into the abyss. That's a good version. I also thinking of it as being punched in the gut every day. Yesterday I got some really good news for my business, and I also got a couple of punches in the gut, bad news. Shit. I wish that hadn't happened. And that happens basically every day. And so I think, you know, if you're really trying to build something new, there will be problems almost every day. And you can whine and complain and say, "Oh, this sucks. It's so hard." Or you can say, "No, I'm doing the thing, and I'm going to keep doing the thing, and I'll just learn to roll with the punches. I'll just deal with it." And so I think part of being a grown up, there was a wonderful book on personal growth way back in the 1980s, The Road Less Traveled. Um, and I'm forgetting the author, but the first line of it is life is suffering. And the sooner you accept that life is suffering, the less you'll suffer, paradoxically. And he made the point that most people are just whining and complaining about the suffering part of life. But once you say, "Yep, that the bad thing happens, let's go," all of a sudden, none of the bad. Again, if your child dies, I'm completely compassionate. That could be a life-changing, brutal, horrible thing. But most of suffering, so you're broke. So, somebody's angry at you. I had a friend once who said, "What are they going to do? Take away your birthday?" You know, so just getting over all of the bad things that are happening and moving on and waking up to create, build, love, care. You know,
yeah.
I'm a big believer that gratitude is happiness. So if you can
Mm.
wake up grateful, no matter what bad things happened, no matter what you're afraid might happen tomorrow, again, Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius, serenity in the face of all the things. And Buddhism has another kind of take for that. I think you need to find a way so that you're continually focused on the good and then you're not beat up by the bad. There will always be bad things. Just get over it and keep focusing on the good. And ultimately, that's the path to a happy, satisfying life.
Mm. Yeah, so inspiring. Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate your time and energy. And yeah, thank you so much again. I appreciate it a
Thank
lot.
you. Thank you,
See you soon.
Salvador. Yeah,
Thank
delighted to
you.
be here. You're welcome.
Mm.
Bye bye.
Bye.